Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. That's like a good class group, isn't it? Now, first of all, isolated living. This is just a test run for you. When I chose this subject 5 years ago, I actually had in the title, it was actually living in isolation. So this will give us a good sort of first-hand look at what we're going to propose that we do for the next few months. And I had early living in isolation 50 years ago. Now, we'll get on. We'll make it as light-hearted as possible because I know a lot of you are starting to feel that you have to have something to keep you going. And here we have another little deja vu. In our early presentation, I said to you that we emigrated from the UK to Australia, and we had just 2 ports, and it was in the Canary Islands and Cape Town. So it was 6 weeks, and we only stopped for once, but on the way from Cape Town to Fremantle, and the Fair Sky, if any of you remember, it was an early ship in the 1970s, no stabilizers, no GPS, and we got lost in the Indian Ocean. So we spent a couple of days going around in a circle, but feel relaxed, because not only do this ship have GPS, but our wonderful captain has his atlas. So we can feel quite relaxed that we're going to make it to the next port. And so your guess is as good as mine, Jeff. But it was a bit of deja vu, and we had to smile about it because we have a globe at home where we keep and all the travels that we've done, whether it's speaking engagements or holidays, and we have a map and we mark it all. So we'll have one going back across, and it will match up with the one coming the other way, and we'll do a bit of a circle in the middle. It's a bit of a Scottish dance, actually. It's quite interesting. So anyway, let's get on. From the Highlands of Scotland to the Highlands of Papua New Guinea. And as we said in our introductory presentation, John and I met at London Airport, young 18-year-olds, looking for adventure, looking for something different to do. And we tossed a coin and said, Australia or Canada? And Australia came up also because John had family out there. And when we got out to Melbourne, and he was working with Ansett at the time, that's an airline that eventually went downhill and off the books altogether. And he luckily made the decision to, I was going to say jump ship, that wouldn't work. He decided to leave the airline and apply for another job. And if you heard him the other day, he applied for this job in Papua New Guinea. And again, we had to get the atlas out to find out where Papua New Guinea was because we didn't know. We were brand new, 21-year-olds arriving in Australia. Let's go. It must be an island, it must be an Australian island off the north coast somewhere. Let's head up there. And so I said, yeah, no worries, let's go. So after 3 months in Sydney, we then John moved up to Port Moresby first, and then I flew into Port Moresby. Then we flew straight across to Madang district, and the office said to us, we want you to go to the wharf in the morning, and there'll be a government trawler there which will take you up the coastline of Madang to your first posting. And of course, we envisaged a government trawler being a very large boat. So we walked onto the wharf in Madang with our couple of little bags, and we sort of got to the edge of the wharf and we went, oh, that's it. So this little boat, there's like a dinghy type thing. It did have 2 cabins, I must admit. We clambered on that and headed up the coast to Bogia. And on board was a gentleman, Papua New Guinean, and we were told by John's boss, don't interact with this gentleman. You'll be thrown off the boat. And we thought, oh, I wonder why. And it turns out he was Michael Samari, who turned out to be the Prime Minister of Papua New Guinea back in the days. But he was electioneering on this boat, and we were to steer clear of him. So these were all the learning exercises we were getting within a few days of arriving up there. We were then sent up to Bogia, so it's up on the north there, with Madang in the middle, and Sidor is a second posting that we had. Now, my introductory thing said coastal tropical paradise, and it was. This is Bogia, surrounded by beautiful coral, and there was only a number of, I don't know, about 12, 15 houses on this outstation, one office, a tiny little hotel for visitors coming in, and we were based in the last house on this beautiful tropical paradise. If you can imagine coming from London into Melbourne, and then into this tiny little outstation. One way in, one way out, fly in, fly out. And there was palm trees swaying, beautiful coral reefs. It was paradise for us coming from the UK. And we settled in fairly quickly. And this was the types of housing. What I'm going to do over my two presentations is just give you an idea of the types of living conditions and what I got up to while John was out patrolling in the bush. And the houses were all pretty standard, government style. And I've got up there were 4-inch pipes. Now, the 4-inch pipes I'm talking about are where the house is being held up. That was the flexibility during earthquakes. Now, nobody told us we were going to get regular little sort of movement in the land, and the glasses start tinkling in the cupboards when the house starts to move, or you think the dog's rubbing up against the poles under the house. But they make them that way so the houses will actually move. The walls do not go all the way up to the ceiling, which in a later story can be a bit tricky when you're wanting to start a family and you've got your mother there. So that's a story for the next outstation. But all the furniture, in the left-hand photograph, you can see that there's no covers on those chairs. And of course, at 21-year-old, I had brought my sewing machine with me, so very quickly I had to learn how to make the covers for the chairs, the curtains, everything. So make them, last, because as you moved into more government houses, and you just took them with you. Now, we had limited electricity, limited sort of availability, because it was a diesel-operated generator, and so therefore it was only running for a couple of hours in the morning, and a couple of hours in the afternoon, and into the evening for a couple of hours. No ceiling fans, louvered windows to let the breezes come through. The houses were built so you'd get the breeze, and I had taken all our wedding presents with us, and we had one pedestal fan, that fan that's sitting up on the cupboard, one fan, but it was of no use because when you wanted it on, there was no power to plug in. And the vinyl record player that's sitting in the middle, that was my pride and joy. I got given a record player for my 21st, and everyone in here would know what a record player is. But on some of our cruises, when I'm speaking, a lot of the youngsters look at us and think, what on earth is a record player? To put your vinyls on? No, not quite. No, it's a bit more advanced than a cassette player, I kept telling them, but they didn't believe me. Right, so we then had kerosene fridges. Sorry, I missed that little bit before. Kerosene fridges and freezers, where we had to fill up the back of the fridge and freezer with kerosene to keep them running because we didn't have power. But at least we had a fridge or a freezer, which was really handy. The other day, John was telling you a story about a snake that bitten one of the local guys in the hospital across the road from us. This was the hospital he was talking about, and it was really for the ladies coming in for having the babies or sort of small injuries. Otherwise, they had to go into Madang or some of the surrounding areas for anything major. They couldn't really stay there. But we were young. We didn't worry too much. And when we arrived in Bogia, John was sent out on patrol straight away. So I had the job of unpacking all our wedding presents, putting them all into the house. We were the last house on the outstation, so I had to walk in probably 5-10 minutes into the main area to visit the other women that were there. So I thought, I think I'll ride his motorbike. He had a motorbike there, and I thought, I'll hop on this motorbike. So I jumped on it, took off down to the other end of the little township, back again. And as I came around the corner, the bike slipped, and I fell onto the engine with my leg. My leg stuck on it. I had to hobble from there to that hospital, so this is our house here, over to the hospital to actually get it seen to, because it was stuck, and I just sort of peeled it off. I don't want to give you too much information. But that was my only time I was ever used that hospital. But then it's part of the responsibilities that you employ, and in those days, we called them houseboys, domestic staff, domestic servants, whatever, back in the 70s. And I had nothing to do. I had no work at that stage. And I thought to myself, well, I don't really need to bring somebody else in to help clean the house and brush the floors and wash and all the rest of it. I'll do it myself. And everyone said, no, you've got to employ somebody. So this was our first houseboy. Now, he did not speak any English, and I did not speak any pidgin English. I got to learn it, because this is only within a week of being there. And so I think in the introduction presentation, we talked about communications, so important. And if you don't get it right with pidgin English, you're in trouble. So when you say to the houseboy to clean the floors and the windows and the dishes and whatever, but when you come round to this one, Can you guess what happened here? When I said to him, now you just have to make the bed. Now, we all know what make the bed means, ladies, don't we? And gentlemen. Up come the covers, and that's the bit. He came back to me and he said, oh, Mrs., where's the hammer and the nails and the wood? How am I going to make this bed for you? So you've got to be just so careful with communications. When we arrived, there's 12 expatriate families on this outstation. It was one of our bigger ones, luckily for us, for the first one. And there was a family with 2 teenage girls. Now, they were homeschooled, which was really quite rare. Most times they would send the children back to Australia for schooling. But the lady was a teacher, and she decided to homeschool them. So we got quite friendly and involved with those guys. And they decided to take us on our first venture into a local village. Well, they said it was a local, close-by village for the day. And on the way, we stopped for a cup of tea out the back of the old Toyota truck, went down the river in a canoe. And this is the canoe. It was not really, in my mind, a canoe. It was just flat sheets of bamboo, and we all just precariously sat along it and rowed away down the river. I think that took about 3 hours, and it was 14 kilometers somewhere else on a long walk. And we eventually got to the village, and we were experiencing a sing-sing, which is a traditional dance, traditional involved. And they were celebrating like Harvest Festival, something like that. So they were all getting dressed up and wearing all the traditional wigs. And that wig, and John will, in one of his extra presentations, be covering vibrant traditions, I think. And he will cover the feathers and how tall it is. And there was somebody up the top putting it onto somebody down below. And we were involved with this for quite some time. So on the way back, we had to stop at the toilets. Now, the toilets in the bush in Papua New Guinea, as they are in many remote areas around the world, are a hole in the ground, right? Well, for health reasons, patrol officers, as part of their duty, are told to go out, make sure these outside toilets are still clean, they're not harboring any diseases. And the rule is that they would have a bamboo stick that would be about 12 foot long. And they'd say to the locals, okay, dig the hole, make sure that stick goes down 12 feet. That's the depth, so you don't get flies and everything at that level. Okay, masters, okay, no worries, we'll do that. So off he went. Not this particular one, but another area where they were digging down, it hit rock, coral, and it wasn't 12 feet down. It was only probably 5 or 6 feet down. They thought, he said 12 feet. Okay, right, so I'll build a stand up here, and I'll set up a set of ladders. And so they built the toilet another 6 foot off the ground, which gave it the 12-foot drop into the hole, which was not suitable at all, but they thought they had covered the rules of what the patrol officer had said. And that was just a really interesting story we got there. And as I said, I didn't have a job when I first got there, but I decided I walked down to the local office. This is our sub-district office, which is one of the better-looking offices up there, and said to the assistant district commissioner, I'm here, have you got a job for me? And he said, oh, funny you should say that. Are you any good at radio operations? And I thought, oh, I've never been on the radio before. Not a very good singer, not a good comedian, no good. I said, I'll give it a go. And what it was the two-way radio from our outstation into the main centres, into the other little villages around the area in Madang. And we got on twice a day, and we had to call into Madang, and usually it was for official duties. But of course, because we were living in isolation, we had to get our groceries brought in. So there would be a shopping list that had to be read out from every single outstation around Madang. So us ladies would all get on the radio, and we'd be putting our orders through. And then they would be, ringing into the chemist or the grocery shop or the whatever, buy materials. And people would pop in, their voices would come in over the radio from another outstation saying, oh, yes, I need some of that as well. So we had a bit of a chat session going, which was really enjoyable. But there was no computers back then. And our the telegrams, remember the telegrams? So everything would come in, all the official messages would come in, and I'd have to type them up on the telegrams and then give them over to the bosses, and off they'd go. But I think the timing of that was when the Australians in the audience will know about Blue Hills. Any Australians? Yeah, Blue Hills on the radio. Very popular radio, a bit like, equivalent to in England, the Archers. So it came on like for 10 minutes twice a day. And as soon as that finished, I knew I had to take off down the road because we didn't have anybody ringing up and saying it's time to go to work. John talked about the volcanic island. That was just across from where we lived. And occasionally we would take a bit of a jaunt over there because a lot of the jobs I did were administrative, postal, bank services, all sorts of anything that needed doing. The women generally took those roles on when all the men were out on patrol or they were looking after the local government or if John was over there on patrol. But I would occasionally go over to Manum because one of the advantages of Manum Islands, being a volcanological observatory, it had 24-hour power. And so we would go over for a bit of a break in the air conditioning, but that had its downside because in that same building, there was a couple of beds and there was all the equipment you need, a little kitchen and what have you. But you would be lying in bed at night and you could feel all these movements. And it certainly wasn't John, that's for sure. I felt all these, and it was rats, big rats, running around you. So there had its disadvantages about going off to stay in the air conditioning. And just sort of moving on to planning ahead, living in isolation. Because we could not get to the shops, there was no shops anywhere in these outstations, patrol posts, sub-district offices that we lived. There was no shops at all. We would have to order in ahead. Now, when you're on the coast, this little boat, the same little government boat that dropped us off, they would bring in the groceries and the bulk items, so buying in bulk, so that would last you for 2 to 3 months. They would be delivered by this boat. Once or twice a fortnight, sometimes weekly if you were lucky, the planes would bring in the newspapers, the fresh bread, the fresh meat, those sorts of things on the coast. And when I do the next presentation, I'll talk about how we did it when we were up in the Highlands, because it was slightly differently up there. But to make sure that you've got sufficient food in your pantry, you've got to stock up, because the patrol officer could be called out at any minute to go off for 10, 15, 20 days, or up to 70 days. So he had to make sure he had enough food to take with him. But also we'd end up with visitors coming in. There might be officials, there might be people coming to visit the area, checking out agriculture or health issues, or there might just be some visiting film crews. They all wanted to do documentaries up in Papua New Guinea. If they ended up coming to us in the locations we were in, we had to make sure they had somewhere to stay, and we'd have to have enough food to look after them. And there was we had Spanish film crew, we had a Japanese film crew, and it was really fascinating. It took me back to the time in Scotland when my mum ran the guest house in Edinburgh, and we had visitors from all around the world coming to stay. So we sort of started a visitor's book as well, because I wanted to capture all the different people that had come in. Not so long ago, we tried to get in touch with the Japanese film crew, because they had taken some fabulous photographs of our son. But it was interesting being able to cope with that, the food that you needed, being long life. Even to this day, thank goodness, I have a pantry that is full of bulk tins. Whenever they're on special, we'll buy them and store up the pantry so that we know that we've got enough to last us. That's when we're at home, when we get home. With the market, that was a really eye-opening exercise for me, because coming from London and Scotland, we didn't have half of the types of vegetables that they had up in PNG. And so I learned what to do with taros and yams, sago and kauka, which is sweet potato, and cabbage. Now, green bananas was the good one, because I thought, green bananas, I just have to leave them and let them ripen. I had no idea there were plantains or the green bananas that you cook with. And I sat with them on my bench for such a long time, waiting for them to get yellow. It just wouldn't work. So I learned a lot at the market. The ladies on the outstation, because they'd been there a little while, they decided, this 21-year-old arrives, had nothing to do, let's teach her some of the handcrafts. So I got right into quilting, templates being made, all the different handcrafts that you would normally do when you're retired, like at this age. And I was learning macrames and all sorts of things. And I thought, well, now, at my age, I should be out clubbing. Because I missed all of the nightclubs and all the music and all the dancing and everything that we did in our 20s, because I was so busy doing the handcrafts. I'm a dab hand at making all sorts of embroidery and quilting and different things that I learned back then. Not that I've got too many now, because my mum was a great little crocheter. The other collecting of shells. As you saw, we were living on a coral right around us. Again, we were naive coming from the UK, because most of your shells on the beach in the UK, you just go and pick them up and they'd be dead and they'd be just dried shells. But taking any shells, back then, of course, you wouldn't do it now, you could go along the coral and you could pick up the live shells off the coral. And again, I thought, oh, this is beautiful, I'll collect some of these. And the little cowrie shells, the little ones, all of these shells were live. And I didn't realize, and when I picked them up and put them on my hand, they started moving up my arm. You know, and all these things were crawling around the place. So I learned how to clean them and store them. And the shells that I've collected over the years, that's just a few of them now, because I've handed them on to our grandchildren with the stories of where in Papua New Guinea they came. And the one up the top here, up there, there's the kina shell. And they're very popular in the Highlands, and they get made into the traditional, men would wear them around their necks, and that, John will cover that in a future presentation. I'm wearing one today that's been made, and John's had some holy shillings put into them to make a necklace. And they're quite decorative, and they're used as money, because the kina, the word kina, is the money in Papua New Guinea. The paper money now is even kina. And no TV, radio, only radio. The only radio we had was like the ABC or Radio National, that was it, back in the 70s. The sound system that we moved up to from my record player had a record deck and reel-to-reel. We spent a lot of time recording all our music so we could play the reel. In fact, when we were sitting with that reel-to-reel in the house recently, we've still got it, 1970, we've still got it now. We got it out, we put it on. And a young visitor came and she was standing looking at it thinking, what is that going round and round there? And we're trying to say, that's a tape recorder, you know, it's a big one, it's a music machine. And they couldn't believe that it was still operating to this day. Now the Beatles that are on the side here, this is relevant to when we went to the movies. We did have movies. And in the coast, we would sit outside, they'd drop a big white sheet, and we'd have a big movie camera, and they'd send the movies in from wherever, from Port Moresby usually, or Lae, and in would come the big boxes. And we'd be sitting watching the movie in our deck chairs, and the children, there was a lot of Christmas beetles. I don't know if you have seen Christmas beetles, but they've got little jaggy legs. They're flying around all over the place, and the local children would collect them up. And they started making them into a little chain, joining the legs together. And they would tippy-toe up behind us, particularly the ladies, and then they'd clip them onto our backs and let them hang down your back while you were sitting there. And you'd walk away, and all of a sudden you'd feel all these little beetles, harmless, but the kids thought it was funny. They just broke up laughing and sort of took off. But we had to pass the time of day away, and the good old board games came out all the time. And because we didn't have 24-hour power, you could be in the middle of a game of Monopoly or Scrabble or whatever. Power goes out, so out comes the Coleman lamp or the kerosene lamp. You hang it up and you just keep playing. I did write a few articles for the women's magazines in Australia because it was something, that I just thought I'd share. My family are journalists, all of them. All my brothers were journalists. My father was the editor of the Daily Mail in Scotland for years. So I was very much involved with journalism. So I thought I'd write the small articles for the magazines. We used to make our own Christmas cards, do our own black and white photography. That was fun. And then and the macrame little edges that I added. But I suddenly became a hairdresser when the army helicopter team came in, and they were surveying the area that we were living. And they'd been told that their boss was arriving. And these guys said, oh my goodness, can you give us a quick haircut? Because the boss is coming in, we better look good for him. So I said, oh yeah, I'll get out the little cutter thing that you used to have back in the day. So I started trimming the hair. But the helicopter pilot, the one that wears the headphones, he said, oh, can you do my ears for me? And I'm going, okay. And you had to get in and get the long hair. He had a lot of hair on his back as well. And he did ask me to go across his back. Never done that again, but it was needed at the time just for him to pass muster as far as the boss was concerned. Passing the time away. Do you recognize John? One of the things was very popular back in the 70s, the vice versa parties. The men went dressed up as the women and the women as the men. And I was actually pregnant at that time. And then we had progressive dinners and Christmas parties and what have you. But the progressive dinners were always hilarious because the houses were quite a distance from each other. And we'd all agree to do the usual thing. Somebody does the starter and you go through the main course and dessert and port and coffee at the end or whatever. And we did have a fair amount of alcohol in our storerooms. So we'd move from one house to the other. But by the time you got to the last one, you could never find where your house was when you tried to walk back down the hills or through the paths. But it was fun. So we learnt a lot of community engagement and fun nights to keep people kind of sane in their isolation. So party time, guys. Now, I think I said the other day that every 21 months, John got 3 months off. And we would generally leave Papua New Guinea and go, down to Australia or come back over to the UK, which we did. And then you go to your next posting. Now, when I left the UK, I left my mum behind. I remember from the other day, I'm one of 7. I'm the youngest, and I'm the only girl. And my father passed away when I was only just 18, just before John and I met. So Mum was on her own, and she didn't stop us from going over to Australia. I could see she was very strong about it. And I kept thinking, in later life, I thought, oh my goodness, what did I do leaving my mum like that and just saying, bye, we're off to Australia. So I kept writing to her, and in those days the letters would take, 10 days back and forth. And I wrote to her when we were living in the tropical paradise of Bogia and said, Mum, if you ever want to join us, feel free. She was on the next ship. And she stayed with us for 25 years. She didn't just come for a holiday. She didn't just come in and stay with us for a little while and go to my brother in Sydney. No, I'm her only daughter. She came to me. She was very well received with the local people. She was called, the Lapoon Mama. Lapoon is older lady in Pidgin English. So she was the Lapoon Mama. She did a lot of interacting with the locals. She never ever spoke Pidgin English. And there's another communication story later on about my mum. And she just loved it because she was so used to dealing with people from all over the world. It didn't bother her. She also ran a guest house, so she was very useful when it came to cooking those extra meals for people that were visiting. And we did a lot of handcrafts to take into Madang and through the CWA, the Country Women's Association, which in the UK is a bit like the WI, I think it is. And so we worked together a lot. She stayed with us, but she ended up coming to Sidor, which was that one, not the tropical paradise. This outstation had 3 expatriates, and we were one of them. So 2 other families, nowhere near the beach. And if you did go to the beach, it was black volcanic sand with sand flies. So gone was the tropical paradise that she was joining me at. But she got so used to it, she didn't worry. The house was a little bit different as well. It was an old fibre house, and it had the water tanks. We never had running water, and we didn't have electricity. Water was always brought in or through rainwater. And when the tanks, I don't know if anyone here has lived in any remote areas where you go out and you test the side of the tanks to find out how high or low your water levels are. So you would do that, and if it was going low and it wasn't going to rain, the trucks would bring in some river water. You would put some kerosene in the top of that water to stop the mosquitoes from surviving. So, of course, you had to boil your water all the time. And the gas bottles in this particular house, we lived off a gas stove. Up in the Highlands, it's a wood burner type thing. But on the coast, it was gas bottles, and they had to be brought in again by the local boat that brought your groceries. So you'd still have to measure where the gas was in your bottles and plan ahead. So living in isolation meant you couldn't just go out and buy whatever was needed. And the furniture was all the same, so my cushion covers and what have you fitted. And this is the house we were in with no walls going all the way to the ceiling when my mother was staying with us and we decided we'd like to start a family. My mother often thought there was an earthquake. So, not every night, but well, we were young. Now, we also got the local people to build grass houses. And in Australia, we call them valley huts or, the outside. I don't know if you have them in the UK. But the grass roofs, they're entertaining areas you would have outside your house. We've got one at the moment in Brisbane. And the boys would build those, and we'd sit outside. And often some of the visitors, when they would come, would join us. And John will cover later a story about War Graves Commission, Japanese War Grave Commission people coming to visit. And when they did, they always brought with them bottles of Johnnie Walker Scotch. And when they start drinking, they keep drinking. It's a bit like their, sake and what have you. My mum was the consummate host. She would take them out into the house wind and sit with them, bring out the nibbles and little eats for them. And she would join in as the bottle went around. Mum would be sitting in the circle and she'd have a drink as it went around as well. But the Japanese loved it. She didn't speak Japanese either, but she got on extremely well with them, I think, because she fed them. And when John wasn't around, and in self-government, he was up in an outstation. He was away for 70 days. And because he wasn't there, and I was the wife, we had to do the judging of the choral festivals or the dancing and greasy pole fun days they had for their self-government celebrations. And whatever jobs he would do, if you were the only one there other than, no other patrol officers, then the wives used to have to step in and look after whatever was happening. Now, we did have animals. We did get pets. And John will touch on the dog again. But our dog, Pren is Pidgin English for friend. And he was given to us by the local policeman who felt that a patrol officer should have a good, sturdy dog to look after him and his family. And his dog had had puppies. And he brought this dog around to us, a little dog in a box, totally shaved, no hair. And he was sort of like a boxer, ridgeback, sort of cross type dog. Beautiful little dog. And I looked at him and I thought, oh my goodness, he really looks a bit scruffy. And what had happened is the policeman got embarrassed because the dog had fleas, and he thought the only way to clean this up, to pass it on to the patrol officer, was to shave it. So he came naked with this little dog. And the dog grew up to be such a great, vigilant patrol dog, because he went with patrolling John all the time. But if he was home, he would look after me. He wouldn't let anyone near us. We never locked our houses. We never closed anything up. If you trusted the local people, they trusted you. And you were out in the bush with them all the time. The little owl John found on the road, he decided, this was on our first posting, he brought it home and we fed it and we grew it up, and then we decided, well, we can't keep this thing under the house. He'll have to learn to fly. So John took the little owl up into the tree and launched it to fly. And boom. It did okay. It did okay. It didn't land. It didn't hurt itself or anything. But John was stuck up the tree then. He had to get back down. But he taught it how to fly. And the bottom photograph is our cat, which was going to be, the plantation owners had lots of cats around. And there was one day we were visiting the coconut plantation, and this cat, all these kittens, the owner was going to drown them all because there was way too many of them. And I couldn't handle that. So I picked up this tiny little kitten. It wasn't even 3 or 4 weeks old. And I just put him in my pocket and took him home, not realizing that I was going to have to feed this little thing and look after it, which I did do. But he followed me everywhere, and he got used to the noise of my flip-flop thongs or jangles, whatever it is, the flip-flops, and he followed that around the house. But he became huge. He was like a wild cat. He was massive. And he used to hide behind the doorway, and if anyone was walking past with the flip-flops on, the cat would jump up the side of the door and attack them. And if the dog came inside, the dog would walk past the lounge, and the cat would be sitting on the back, and he would jump onto the dog and hang around his neck. The dog just stayed outside. He said, no, too dangerous. You'd think sitting next to a crocodile, it would be more dangerous for that. That crocodile, which was also in the early photograph, was one that was given to John in the first posting. And it's been beautifully stuffed, locally, stuffed by the local people, just with like shavings and wool and things like that. The taxidermy was amazing because there was just one cut down it, and they presented it to John as a gift. And we brought that back to Australia, and it's at our son's place at the moment. But when we were in Adelaide, there was a pet show on. And so our sons decided to put a collar and lead on the crocodile and took it to the pet show, and it won the most unusual pet. But our son at the moment, he's a paleontologist. A few years ago, he took the stuffed crocodile along to a CT scan hospital area because he wanted to find out if there was any bones or anything left within this crocodile. So you can imagine the faces of the other patients in the hospital when he walks in with a crocodile under his arm and puts it through the same CT scanner that the people were going to be going through. And he didn't find anything, and that's where he said it was one of the best he'd seen. Now, of course, we take Christmas with us wherever we go, most of us, and again, a communications issue. We go, okay, to the houseboy, go outside and cut that tree down, bring it in, stick it in a bucket with rocks in it, and I'm going to put some lights on it. And he's going, it's not going to grow. What do you want to do that for? And then you put the lights on, and of course the lights flash on and off when the power came on, but they were just amazed that we would do something like that, and they loved watching it. This was the houseboy and his wife and their brand new baby. Now, some of the traveling challenges that we had, if you can think of, if any of you have ever been in the tiny small planes that take 4, 6, 8, 12 people, we had to move around in them all the time. And there was some nail-biting times. There's too many stories to tell you. I could end up we could end up doing a presentation just on flying challenges. But just a quick one, when you climb in behind the pilot, and Mum and I were coming back from somewhere, and he was taking off, and luckily I was behind the pilot, and as he pulled back, his chair broke, and he ended up coming right back onto me. Fortunately, I was flexible enough to get my feet up to push him back up so he would be sitting upright so he could level off the plane. And then he just leant down and did up the bracket or whatever it was that had come undone. It wasn't, it was really scary, but you acted instantly at the time. You didn't think about it. But often, that photograph at the top, that was when we were actually leaving PNG, and we had our son with us. There was no safety belts for the little ones. You just clambered in the back and did up the safety belt over the top. And I think there's quite a few stories of, the pilots going up through the clouds and looking for the mountains, because where we were, the next presentation I do will be in the Highlands. But, you're going through some major mountain areas, and the pilots get up above the clouds just to see where they're actually going. And so we may have time to do some more talks about flying. And this one is a bit of a challenge. John's out on patrol, and just imagine, I'm sitting at home, there's only 3 houses, there's Mum and I in a house, and then John comes back from being on a 70-day patrol, and he says, I've just been asked to transfer to the Highlands. Oh, okay, when? Next week. So we don't have any removalists that can come in and pack up the house and put it in wherever and take it there. We had to pack it up. We had to move it. So they tell us what size plane is going to come in and get us. So on the dining room floor, we get out the chalk and we mark out the size of the internal dimensions of this plane. We know the weight we're allowed to carry, and we know where the weight has to be positioned, because he's an aircraft engineer. And we got a set of bathroom scales. So we pack up a box after a box of, all our wedding presents and all the rest of the things we've accumulated. Put them into the box, weigh it, write down how much it weighs, work out where on the floor diagram it's going to go. And we went through everything in the house, including ourselves, our own weight, my mum, our houseboy's wife and the baby, the cats, the dogs, everything, weighed it up. And then we knew we were going to be able to transfer our gear up into the Highlands. So we then ended up, I'll just run this little bit of a video for you. And you'll see the planes coming in to pick us up. And remember, this is 1970s video footage in an old movie camera. And when the plane arrived, we had to the truck was there, and we ended up having to load it up. We took off out of Sidor and just headed up towards the valleys and the mountains, because it's a huge island. As John said the other day, it's the second largest in the world. And we are going from the coast up to the Highlands. And we're going through mountainous areas. And this little bit of footage is really only to show you the types of terrain that we did fly in and out of. Riverbeds, valleys, roadways that were built. They were starting to build the highway between the coast and the highlands. They were getting that underway back then. And we land in at Eastern Highlands, which is part way up the island, in a place called Goroka. Now, at this stage, we still did not know exactly where we were going. We got told it was the Southern Highlands, but there's a lot of outstations in the Southern Highlands. So we sort of got told at that Goroka airstrip that we were going to Tari in the Southern Highlands, which was quite a large patrol post. We had to fly through this. That's another plane down there. I know it's a really fuzzy video, but that's another plane, and that's a lake. We were flying into this Tari in the Southern Highlands, and that was much larger patrol post. But the mountain range on either side was enormous, and you had to come in one way through what they called the gap, and you had to make sure you'd land. Now, the airstrip there was quite large, and this is the houses, and there was a hospital, and there was a number of expatriates. And what I'll do is, in my next presentation, I will cover what it was like to live up in the Southern Highlands, which was quite different to the coastal isolation life that we got sort of introduced to in our first couple of years. And that's showing you there from Sidor up to, there's Madang, there's Bogia, and then we moved into Sidor, and we flew into the Goroka, which is right here, and then we flew through that mountain range right up into Tari. And then we'll talk about the Tari and the Como in my next presentation. So I hope that you've enjoyed it, just capturing a snapshot of what my life was like in the isolated areas of Papua New Guinea. And the next time we'll go through into the Papua New Guinea, and then we'll go into some areas of Australia and the Northern Territory. But until then, John will be his next presentation. Just check the horizon to find out what time he's on, but his will be The Adventure Continues into the Jungle. And we hope you've enjoyed it today. And if you've got any questions, just stop us wherever you like. Thank you.